figure out this microphone. Okay, before we commence the meeting, I'd like to mention that I'm Acting Mayor Kunst, sitting in for Mayor Froese this afternoon and for this evening. As many of you are aware, Mrs. Debbie Froese passed away this last week, and we send our deepest sympathies to the Mayor and his family. So good afternoon. I want to bring the regular afternoon meeting of Council to order. First item on the agenda is the adoption and receipt of the agenda items. May I have a motion, please? So Councillor Ferguson and Councillor Arneson. All those in favor? Next item on the agenda is the adoption of the minutes for December 16. Can I have a motion, please? Councillor Whitmarsh and Councillor Ferguson. All those in favor? Any errors or omissions? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? All right, so moved. Next is the motion to move into special closed. May I have a motion to resolve into closed and for items on table, please? Yeah. Councillor Arneson and Councillor Whitmarsh. All in favor? Oh, sorry, Steve. All right. Oh, one property item? Okay. All right, so we will move into special closed. Oh, we have to vote. All in favor?
Who moved in second?
All right.
Just go. You have one.
All right, good afternoon. So I'd like to reconvene the regular afternoon meeting. We have a presentation from Tourism Langley. So I'd like to welcome Tourism Langley here. They're going to be doing a presentation on the myriad of activities that they do and also an update on the 2020 tactical plan. So welcome.
Good afternoon, Acting Mayor and Council. The purpose of staff's presentation in advance of that of Tourism Langley this afternoon is to provide Council with context and background on the organization. Tourism Langley has been the destination marketing organization of the township since 2008. And in mid-2016, when Tourism Langley was undertaking a 5-year renewal, the Township Council initiated stakeholder consultation through staff. Through this process, the following timeline of activities came to fruition. In January of 2017, Township Council resolved to request organizational changes in the organization, including a voting member of Council as well as a staff liaison. Then, in March, Tourism Langley held a special meeting seeking, in fact, to dissolve. Stakeholders voted against that dissolution. In April, Tourism Langley held an AGM and re-elected a new board of directors, followed by, in May, Township submitting a 5-year MRDT renewal to seek the 2% levy. In June of 2017, the City of Langley announced the termination of its partnership with the organization. And then in September of that year, the Ministry of Finance endorsed the township's 5-year renewal for Tourism Langley until 2022. In January of 2018, Tourism Langley hired new staff. The funding model for Tourism Langley, as well as numerous destination marketing organizations across BC, are founded through a provincially levied tax, the Municipal Regional District Tax, or known as the MRDT. MRDT is collected by the BC Ministry of Finance from the accommodation sector. So in the township, that would be hotels, motels, Airbnbs, as well as B&Bs. and they collect that tax from their overnight stay patrons. In the township, the tax is 2%. The Ministry of Finance then issues the MRDT collected to the township, and we in turn to tourism. The provincial tax legislation identifies how those funds are to be used and the reporting requirements around them. Each year in November, a tactical plan for the following year is required, and an annual performance and financial report is required each May, and that's due to the Ministry of Finance, and it must be endorsed by the township. The regulation also defines what MRDT can be used for. Eligible expenses include tourism marketing projects and programs, and eligible uses include management staff, HR, finance, office expenses, lease and rental, and IT costs. The township also supports Tourism Langley through a fee-for-service agreement, and since 2008, when it was initially created, the funding has not changed. It remains at $51,000 annually. There are a number of expectations that come with it, and you'll see listed on the screen here the terms of agreement, which are quite diverse. They range from representing the township's tourism interests at events in the community, to raising the profile of the sector overall, to support growth of the local workforce, to engaging with township sport hosting incentive program grant recipients to extend or diversify their stay interests in the community, as well as helping staff prepare sport hosting bids and supporting the township's buy local programs, amongst the many others that you will see here. The previous renewal of the MRDT and the fee-for-service agreement with Tourism Langley was something that Council undertook, and it has renewed and clarified the expectation of the township. It has established greater involvement of the Council appointee and the staff liaison, provided greater insight into Tourism Langley's operation and fiscal status, as well as ensuring that timely reporting to the Ministry of Finance. Tourism Langley has redefined itself, and in that process, it has needed to do a number of things, and that's include rebuilding stakeholder relationships, and that has come through individual meetings and including a broader stakeholder group, to increasing public awareness and demonstrating the value of Tourism Langley, the revitalization of the brand to illuminate the township's competitive advantages, as well as ensuring that the digital capacity through its new website and features and digital collateral overall has a means to be tracked and measuring its impact. As we transition into 2020, Tourism Langley has a strong, diverse, cooperative, committed, and engaged board of directors. Its executive director has relevant sector experience and township knowledge. We continue to see the diversification of digital collateral and improved analytics capacity. Their new grants and sports sponsorship program stream, which Aaron will speak to, has targeted increasing overnight stays. And everything that remains relevant to staying focused is exactly what's part of their mandate. It's my pleasure to welcome Aaron Kredba, Executive Director, to share with you insights into Tourism Langley's achievements and its direction.
Thank you, Val. Daniela will just bring up our presentation. I'd just like to acknowledge that we are on the unceded traditional territories of Kwantlen, Katsi, Matski, and Semiahmoo First Nations. Yeah. So Tourism Langley is the destination marketing organization for the Township of Langley. We have a dedicated board of 10 board of directors, including a few joining us today. We have Paul Weemy from the Trinity Western University, Whitney Sienkiewicz, Thunderbird Show Park, and Brenda Knights from SAM. Margaret Kunst is our Township of Langley Council appointee, and Val Gafka is our Township of Langley staff liaison. We have two staff, myself, the executive director, and Daniela Potesta is our destination marketing manager, and always my left or right hand. We both started working for Tourism Langley about 2 years ago. We're proud to say we were both born and raised in the Township of Langley and still call it home today. So the purpose of my presentation today is to provide you with an update on the work Tourism Langley has completed in the last year. But to begin, I'd like to share some Destination BC economic impact statistics that demonstrate the value of tourism. Tourism in British Columbia generates over $18 billion in revenue annually and is growing. It supports jobs for more than 137,000 people, and it generates $5.4 billion in export revenue. In 2017, tourism contributed $9 billion to the BC economy, and it may be less understood that tourism in fact contributes more to BC's GDP than any other primary resource industry. Depending on the price of oil, sometimes tourism is number one. Within British Columbia, tourism is broken into 6 regions. The Township of Langley is a part of the Vancouver Coast and Mountains region. It's an important region in the province as the gateway to the rest of BC, and we welcome about 9 million visitors a year. So with this context, let's take a look at Tourism Langley and what our organization is doing to elevate the township's profile on the tourism front. An important key performance measure for us is accommodation statistics. We subscribe to a service that provides us data each month, including occupancy rates, average daily rates, and more. Not every hotel currently provides us the data, but the majority do, and we're working on getting the remaining hotels on board. On your screen is a 12-month running total as of November 2019. Occupancy percentages have increased year over year, and we currently have a 75.3% average occupancy rate compared to the provincial average of 62.9%. Average daily rate has also increased and currently sits at just under $141. This translates to over $26.5 million of revenue generated from overnight stays in the Township of Langley in a 12-month period. Now some details on what we are doing to help support and increase those numbers. In 2018, we began work to refresh our brand. The result was one that leads with what we saw as our competitive advantages, history and wine. The hashtag Langley Fresh has long held a strong social media following, so we will continue to use and build upon that in marketing and our social platforms. We're often asked, what is Langley Fresh? Think fresh from Langley. Langley is the root of so many things that we love. It's where the produce comes from that transforms into some of our favorite meals. It's where the freshest local meat is raised and amazing local wine is produced. It's where the people come to adventure outside, to feel at home on the inside, and it's the birthplace of BC. With a new brand, we were able to build a new website that launched early in 2019. The biggest change was adding business listings for our stakeholders to help promote their business to visitors on our site. The newest feature of our website went live last month, and now visitors have the ability to book accommodation through our website. Co-op marketing has always been a successful tactic for us. Current programs we participate in are the Fraser Valley Ale Trail, Circle Farm Tour, West Coast Food, the newest program, West Coast Curated, and for 2020, we have rejoined the Fraser Valley Group. The concept of co-op marketing is that multiple sectors or communities create a marketing program and each financially contribute and work jointly to execute. Marketing plans are submitted to Destination BC, and Destination BC also provides some financial contribution. This means that our financial contribution, when combined with the other communities and Destination BC, has turned $5,000 of our resources into a total budget of $50,000 to $175,000, depending on the program. Thanks to a relationship with Destination BC and some contracted work with a local PR company, we have welcomed travel writers from outlets such as Chatelaine Magazine, Calgary Herald, Daily Hive, Vancouver Sun, Province, and many more. On the screen is just one example. Last fall, we hosted a group of freelance writers, including the Traveling Mum. We created the itinerary, which she shared highlights of on her Instagram page through posts and stories to her over 21,000 followers. While she was there, she also collected ideas for future stories that she's writing. The grant and sponsorship program was established in 2018 with the purpose of financially supporting new or existing events taking place in the Township of Langley, with an emphasis on events generating overnight stays in the shoulder season, and with our financial resources being used for marketing efforts of the event. We provided just over $46,000 to 10 events in 2018 and just over $72,000 to 13 events in 2019. In our marketing efforts, we always work to include stories of our rich Indigenous culture. A few examples include Hello BC featured the This is Kwantlen exhibit, moderated by Brenda Knights, Kwantlen First Nation and Tourism Langley board member. We created a video featuring the Indigenous walking tours led by Deanna Miller and Carlin Andres. We always include Lalum and Shumili Gift Shop in our media visits. We have committed to participating in Feast on the Fraser this year with several other communities and also in partnership with Indigenous Tourism BC. This event received a $100,000 grant from the Canadian Experiences Fund to support it. And our co-op marketing program, West Coast Curated, will be featuring artist Brandon Gabriel in a video series that they're currently working on. So as Val had mentioned, in 2019, we continued with a more prominent digital marketing focus. Visitors now look to the internet to plan their trips and make their bookings, so we work to keep our social media inspiring and engaging. We can never have enough imagery and continue to build our asset library with what both media and visitors are looking for. We tell stories through blog posts and Instagram to capture our audience's interests. Over the last year, our Facebook account saw more than a 70% increase in engaged users, 83% increase in impressions, and an incredible 942% increase in video views. Our Instagram account gained 1,500 followers and a 134% increase in impressions. And this summer, we spent a great deal of time working on developing videos to create a Langley Fresh campaign. We developed a total of 11 videos, ranging in length of 30 seconds to 4 minutes, and we've actually brought one of our videos to share with you today.
In the place between the big city and the mountainous wild, I wonder.
What will this day bring?
Will this be an adventure?
What will I learn today?
In the land known as the birthplace of
the place I can always call home.
This is Langley Fresh.
So that was our longest video, and then all of the other ones fall. Basically, each letter is given a theme, and there's more micro videos, both character and theme-wise, that are about 30 seconds or a minute in length that support this video. So everything I have mentioned is by no means... Oh, hold on. I missed something, didn't I? No, I didn't. Okay, sorry. Everything I just mentioned is by no means a complete list of all of our work, but highlights of many of our projects in 2019. We are proud of the work we have accomplished, but it is the feedback from our stakeholders, which we have shared both on the screen and in your package, that tells us the direction we are going in is the right one. While marketing is our primary objective, it isn't possible without some administrative tasks to create the foundation of our office. In 2019, we held a board governance workshop to help us develop an even stronger board model and one that effectively reaffirms the board's commitment to Tourism Langley. We are mandated by Destination BC to submit a one-year tactical plan every November and a performance report every May. These are always reviewed and endorsed by the board prior to submission. A general budget is included in the tactical plan, but we create a detailed budget once that tactical plan has been approved. In 2018, we collected $482,000 of MRDT, and in 2019, I'm estimating it to be $502,000. We are in a financially strong position due to some prior years of transition where expenditures were less than average. The board and myself have been committed to investing funds into programs and initiatives that bring the greatest value to our stakeholders, such as the events, grants, and sponsorships. It's always front of mind that our expenditures during this time must have long-term benefit and not have a negative impact in future years when the funds may not still exist. That completes my summary of 2019, and a preview of our core tactics that were approved by the board are listed on the screen in no particular order. The work that we will be doing, building upon the foundations and relationships we have established in the last 2 years. I'll leave you with a statement that I believe summarizes the direction we want to go this year. By sharing a cohesive narrative through thoughtful storytelling, valuable partnerships and collaborations, reframing local pride, and equipping all stakeholders and community members to be extending the Langley Fresh story, the profile of the region will be elevated and shared beyond its own borders. In sharing that message from a variety of sources and channels, the Township of Langley will become a destination known for its fresh roots. Thank you for your time today and allowing me to review our work from the past year.
Great presentation, thank you. Loved the video. That was Golden Globe-ish. So I do believe we do have a couple questions from the councillors. Councillor Woodward.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for the presentation. I'm glad that the Tourism Langley's gotten through the transition and the separation from Langley City. I think that's, would you characterize that separation as positive, allowing the organization to focus on one municipality?
It's a little bit tricky because it happened before my time, but I think moving forward, it has been positive. It's allowed us to focus. It's definitely sometimes tricky because a visitor to Langley doesn't necessarily know the difference between the city and the township. I think sometimes residents don't always know that difference, so it's hard to expect a visitor to as well. But from our office, it definitely has. We've rebranded, we've focused on what's strong for us, and the response has been really positive.
Yeah, I think just, by extension, if you're focusing on items like Circle Farm tours and the farm aspect and the wine production, most of that, as far as I know, all of it's occurring in the township.
Exactly.
And we have, I think, all the golf courses except for one, for example. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yes.
So that makes sense, and I did appreciate that the video just makes that separation between the two municipalities. I think it's positive. So I'm glad to hear that it's not certainly not hindering you in any way.
No, absolutely
Okay,
not.
so that's great. At the last EGM, I did go to it, and why does the Tourism Langley as an organization have so much cash on hand?
It stems from, well, there's two reasons. So when I came on board, there was a contingency fund that had always been in place, which was a fairly significant amount of money. And then again, when that transition was happening, especially the year there was only one staff person in place, we were reapplying for the funding. And I think it was important that they were careful in what they were spending money on, so that the expenditures that they were spending were much less than previous years. So when you take the contingency fund and then you take a few years of spending less while we built ourselves back up, that is what created.
So it's not typical to have like 700,000 on cash on hand? That wouldn't be typical?
No,
Not typical,
They
okay.
always, our accountant has helped us and advised us. I mean, you always want to have, because we're dependent on the MRDT, and that can be, I mean, tourism is so strong right now, and we're really lucky. But you always want to be prepared if that were to go down, or if we were to lose the MRDT. It's natural to have a fairly hefty contingency amount of money, but that's been our work, is to bring that down to a more normal level.
So the 50,000 annual cash for service, can you correct me? I might be wrong. But
$51,000 annual.
50,000?
51.
51, okay, so great to clarify. What I remember, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, is that going back a decade, that was intended for mobile promotion, more oriented towards paper, brochures, and handing out brochures at strip malls and things like that. Would that be fair and accurate that that's what the fee for service was for at that time?
A decade ago?
And it's transitioning maybe to something new? Or would that be something that maybe Tourism Langley isn't really doing anymore, and maybe we could review that?
I mean, we certainly, because we are now no longer a bricks and mortar visitor center.
Right, that's where I'm going with
but
that.
I would want to double check, but I wouldn't necessarily want to say that those were always combined, because when you are a visitor center, there is separate funding that comes for being a visitor center that would account for that. A lot of the 51,000, because as I think it was on Val's slide, where there's certain things like our rent and administration that we can't use the MRDT funds to pay for. So that's the $51,000. When we're doing our budgets, we account for it with those things. So it's not the brochure distribution or anything like that. It's more the administrative costs that are ineligible for MRDT. So if we were to do our performance report and submit our budget and say that we used MRDT funds to pay our rent, that would be a red flag.
Because 50,000 wouldn't cover that, so you must have other revenue sources that are covering some of those ineligible costs?
We have a few. So the Circle Farm Tour provides a little bit of revenue. We've been thinking about new ways to create some revenue, but we've been more rebuilding up to this point.
Yes, I'm glad I clarified that. So that slide that Ms. Gafka presented seemed to be a list of things you would do even if we didn't send you the money. Would that be fair?
I think there would be a mix. I mean, there's definitely certain items there that are part of it, but I think our hands would be very tied without it.
Okay, so I'm glad that I've asked those questions then, because I appreciate that response. And then one which hotel is not providing you the vacancy and other information?
All of the big ones are. It's a few of the smaller ones. So the Highway Hotel and the Comfort Inn, those two, we have them in the system, but they don't. It requires them to give us their numbers every month, but they haven't. However, that said, in the past, I would say 6 to 8 months, we've made some really significant inroads and having some more positive relationships with the hotels. So we sort of saw that as our first step to make those inroads. And now we've actually reached out to the research company that helps us with that. And they've provided us some tools that we can take to the hotels, because it's a win-win. If we're receiving the data, they are as well. So it's the two small ones that aren't.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Councillor Whitmarsh.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. Really informative. I really appreciate the branding, the new branding process, and what the new brand looks like. And the website I find to be very good, very easy to get around and navigate. So great job on the website. But I had a question, and it relates to the website. Is just what is the process that for businesses or events or those kind of things to be identified on the website? I notice when I look at businesses, there's lots of businesses listed, but there's also lots that are in the township that are not listed. So I'm just wondering, do businesses sign up? Do they pay a membership? Do they pay a fee? Like, how do they get on there, and how do they know they can become part of your website?
Okay. So Tourism Langley is a stakeholder model. Some DMOs, particularly larger ones, such as Tourism Vancouver, they are a membership model where to be listed on anything, you have to be a member, and there's a cost to be a member. We are stakeholders, so there is no cost to be a stakeholder. We have an application form. The idea is that it's a business that has an interest in tourism, benefits from tourism, wants to help us in our programs, and it's sort of a two-way street. So they sign up to be a stakeholder, and then we would include them on our website. Once we receive a stakeholder, it's in our bylaws that the stakeholders get presented to the board of directors, and then they're either approved or not approved. I don't think so far there hasn't been anything that we haven't been able to approve.
Right. Okay, so a stakeholder would show up on the website. If they're not a stakeholder, they don't. So how does Langley Tourism send out information to various businesses, events, asking them if they would like to be a stakeholder?
Particularly if there's a new business that we see as a great fit for what we're working on, then we'll approach them and let them know what the work is that we do, and see if they're interested. Again, most of them will automatically sign up, and then that just allows them to be on the website. When we have our co-op marketing programs that I listed, we generally would want them to be stakeholders in order to be included in requests like that they're blog posts and things like that they're putting together. So yeah, we will generally, if there's somebody that we really would like them to be a stakeholder and they're not, then we will be proactive and go after them. And sometimes businesses will contact us. Right.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. I just, I'll let you have a section here. Day in the life of a couple, day in the life of a grape, an athlete, adventure. It's really fantastic stuff. But when I click on it, there's 3 or 4 things that are listed, they're all great things. But I'm thinking, gee, I can think of about 15 things that would be awesome, and they're not listed. So that was just my question: is how do these businesses and events and activities get on there?
So our website, I mean, that's always everything. It's sometimes things like that or blog posts where we try to keep internally track of things. Those will change throughout the year so that we can rotate them. It's hard because you can't always, sometimes it's more effective to list fewer than everybody, even when we want to. So we do, and we've actually been working on a new database system where we can actually track that even better. So that we can, when we do a blog or we post about a particular stakeholder, it goes into the database so that we're ensuring that it's equitable. We really do try to be as equitable as possible. Right.
Okay. Thank you. That's really helpful. Thank you.
All right. Next speaker, Councillor Ferguson.
Oh, hi. Thank you for coming. I know I just learned something. I guess I should already know libation. I'm a liblationist, so I guess either I should drink more or I should read more encyclopedias or something. Okay, so I say the same thing as Councillor Whitmore. I guess there's a whole bunch of, I was looking at TOL stuff, where I'm always trying to promote what we do here in the township as far as we have for recreation and golf courses and our recreation centers and, of course, hockey and all the different sports, soccer and things like that. I was just wondering if there's a part of you that sports tourism, or you're kind of limited to what you do.
Sports tourism is huge, and it is definitely something that's important with it. It's something that we've committed to working with a little bit more with the Township of Langley over the next year. It's been, again, over the last couple of years, there was almost so much. But sporting events, when they come, if we look at the World Indoor Lacrosse that was here in September, the number of visitors that attracts, and then that's automatically, almost all of them are needing accommodation in the Township of Langley, so it's definitely, that's something that we see as very important. There's just a lot of moving pieces, and so we're just trying to figure out what's the best way for us to do that.
You've got all these sheets. They're great for supposed to.
And that's exactly what we use them for.
And my second question, I know Brenda's here. I just wondered if you've got any involvement with the First Nation, the Indigenous, the Kwantlen, and the Sayam, whether you're involved at all with them as well?
Well, definitely,
As a
that was one of the
partner.
benefits of having Brenda join the board, because that was something that we wanted to. Lalum Cafe, both in the fort and separate, and the gift shop has been hugely received by the media that we're bringing in. It's a story that they're very interested in hearing, so we'll reach out and arrange to have somebody to come and speak to them when they're here for part of their story. So again, it's something that we know is important. We're just trying to figure out what's that right balance. But right now, Kwantlen, Lalum, and the cafe are.
Yeah, because that's something you can explore. I know even in the coffee restaurant they have in Fort Langley, they have a little bit of an art area there.
Yeah.
And of course, on the site in the village, they also have a cultural center there, and also at the National Historic Park, there's some more.
Yeah.
So I mean, I was just asking that. If you
Yeah.
think about it.
We also lost my train of thought. No, there was something there. It'll come back to me.
Okay, very good. Thank you for coming.
Councillor Arneson?
Yes, thank you very much for coming. I really appreciate the presentation, and particularly giving us a context for the different changes and things that have happened. I used to be on that committee, and so I've seen a bit of the analysis of what was lacking and why the township should be more involved in the model and have a different direction. So it's interesting to see how that has shifted and shaped itself, and it's very attractive. I have to say, I have a bit of a technical question, and I'm not sure this is the appropriate time to ask. It maybe sound a bit nerdy, but it's about the analytics, because I think Ms. Gafka was referring to the fact that I know a lot of the data that comes through is very important. It's rich in information. And so I'm wondering the degree to which and what is being done in order to translate that into future visits. I know that's a large part of the project, is to change people's perceptions or attitudes as opposed to a day trip that they might wish to come here for a long weekend, etc. So could you explain, is that something that you work with Tourism BC on, or how does that work?
A little bit with Tourism BC, yes. And then that's where our emphasis, when we look at those hotel statistics, those are probably the most important ones that we get. I mean, although we're seeing that there's not so much those really deep valleys anymore. So it is, unfortunately, it would be nice if we could have statistics that would go out 5 years, but we can only take the ones that we have and sort of see where those need periods are. And then that's a perfect example of, say, a sporting event. So if we're noticing over the past 5 years, sort of in the last couple bits of, like last weeks of February, that's a slow time. How can we fill that? Is there a sporting event that happens in the last few weeks of February that we have a venue space for, that we know we have the hotel space for, and then we can go out and target those kinds of events? Or is it a different kind of event, again, with that overnight stay? So that's the biggest statistic that we have. And we can't foresee the future, but we can definitely see the past and where those trends are. But I was dropping something off at a hotel the first weekend in December, and somebody walked in off of the street, which I didn't think the people did, but apparently they do, and they're like, do you have any rooms for tonight and tomorrow night? And they were 100% full. And then the Holiday Inn across, the other Sandman was, that's the first week of December. So...
And of course, anecdotally, if Harry and Meghan come here, we'll have even more tourism. I hope the paparazzi doesn't join in. But anyways, so thank you very much for your presentation. It's very interesting. And also for the brochure. It's lovely. And I think it's very inspirational for a number of the things that people can look at and choose to do as an activity and just get to know our community better. So thank you.
I'll just clarify that in your group, in the Fraser Valley Experiences Guide that's in there, that's this year's. That's the program that we are rejoining as of March. So if you look at it and you wonder why there's no Langley content, it's because we weren't a part of it this year. But that we are actually working on edits of that document right now, and Langley will be included in that for 2020.
I have a question. It's about Airbnbs. Like, do they pay an MRDT, and how many do we have in Langley? Is there any impact on accommodations?
The million-dollar question.
Ah.
So for Airbnbs in October, it was October 2018 where it was mandated that it used to be you needed to have the minimum of 6 rooms. That went down to it's a single room with a few other parameters. So now Airbnb or our traditional B&Bs that we had in the township, they are responsible to look into whether or not they also need to collect the tax. So they have to make a certain amount in a year to qualify. And it's tricky, but it's not just us. There is a British Columbia Destination Marketing Organization group that we get together several times a year, and it's probably the number one agenda item is because this came into place, but it's taking a while for it to all get sorted out. We do know now when the township sends us our notice of our MRDT tax, there are 2 line items. One is MRDT, one is OAR, online accommodation revenue. So we know how much we are collecting from that, but it's a little bit delayed in what we're getting the information from. I estimated last year it added about $30,000 to our budget, perhaps a little bit less once we get the last quarter's numbers. So there's privacy, so we don't know who they are. We can't access them. Some of them do find us because this is what their visitors are wanting, is the type of information that we're producing. So they're coming into our office, and then we're trying to sort of go from there. But it is tricky.
Okay. I have one more speaker, Councillor Long.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks for your presentation. As you know, I was involved many years ago with you too, so it's encouraging to hear where we're at. You mentioned that there's a shortage of hotel rooms, so it's a good thing that the township now owns a hotel in Aldergrove. And maybe some of that money you have, we could fix it up with. But seriously, there is a lot of grant activity that Tourism Langley has taken on in the last couple of years, supporting our events in the township. And as it goes back to this $51,000, I remember that was money that was given to the Chamber of Commerce at the time. The township funded the Chamber of Commerce to do a tourism aspect of their activities. There was no Tourism Langley at that time, and there was no MRDT funds either. So that goes back historically, and I think that was just diverted to you. But one way that we could sort of get that back is to be supporting you in providing grants to events that happen throughout the township. So I know that you've been doing that, and so is that planning to be continued and even more robust, perhaps?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So the program, we knew that the first year we announced it, and people weren't, the existing events, perfect, because they already existed and could apply. Were new people I'm going to now create an event in the Township of Langley because there is this grant money? That wasn't going to happen. It was going to take a little bit of time for some of these things to happen. So now we're going into year 3 of the grant program, and as we saw in the slides, we've supported more events with more money each year. So, and I predict that will continue to grow. We've also talked about how we continue to be able to afford that, because some of those excess funds were definitely what was earmarked for the grant and sponsorship program. So as those come down, how do we maintain the level of service? And so what we've talked about is just setting aside a percentage of our MRDT that is always dedicated to supporting the events in the township.
It's incredibly helpful because township funds certain activities, but those costs are rising quite exponentially when you take about insurance and other requirements. So we can't always increase the funding that's appropriate, but getting funding from other sources then will certainly help those events to be successful.
And I think we've learned a lot over the last 2 years. We've tweaked it a little bit every year, and we're finding some new ways of stretching the dollars a little bit further and supporting what Destination BC is looking for us in our expenditures.
Well, maybe we could partner on an event sometime. We have a giant concert at McLeod. Thank you.
There's no other questions. So thank you so much for your presentation. I know how hard you guys have worked this past year because I've only been on the board for a year, but yeah, good job.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, so moving on to minutes of committees. So H1 and H2. I need a motion to receive the minutes from the Recreation, Culture and Parks Advisory Committee. Do I have a motion? Councillor Arneson, seconded by Councillor Ferguson. Yes, all in favor? And then I need a motion to endorse the following community members to the Museum Advisory Group. So that's H2. Dr. Virginia Cook and Susan Falk. All in favor? All right. Oh. Oh, yeah, they're waving at me. Uh-oh. Trouble.
Seconder, please.
Oh, right. So, mover. Councillor Richter, seconder. Councillor Arneson. All in favor? All right, thank you for your patience. All right, so now we have other business. Councillor Ferguson?
Oh, yes, other business. There we go. Yes.
Oh.
Be it so moved that the Ontario Road Network acquisition and funding be referred to the 2020 budget for discussion, including but not limited to Willoughby and future policies for consideration of replication of Brookswood Fernridge Community Plan and other areas of the township with respect to construction of new arterial road. To so move. And I wanted to speak to it if I get a second.
Right, do we have a seconder? All right, Councillor Whitmarsh seconds it. And any discussion?
Yes.
Okay, go for it.
I did purposely introduce a list of references for when, if council indeed does support this, to go to budget for discussion. And in the submission, which I've sat down with staff and discussed it, I did promise council last meeting in December, I believe 16, last year in the last century, from the last decade, the opportunity that I would be bringing a motion like this forward. I wasn't quite prepared last meeting, but I indeed came up with a number of references, some 95 pages of community amenity contributions, the Yorks and Jericho Central Gordon 208 Corvold community greenway amenity programs for some reading, and certainly our DCC charge waiver for affordable and supportive of housing, and not limited to, but including the Willoughby Arterial Road completion amenity policy in the motion. So folks at the council here have some reading materials, and anybody that watches or can see in our minutes attached to this motion the 95 pages, and they can read up on themselves as to what indeed the council is doing regarding the budgeting and reviewing these kind of things. So I just wanted to point that out, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you. We have a few speakers. Councillor Long? No, I'm not. Oh. Don't have a button. Councillor Richter?
Yeah, I was just wondering if I could ask the mover what the difference is between this motion and the one that was voted down last meeting.
Well, I can answer, if I may, I can answer that. In the last meeting, actually, it wasn't last meeting, it was probably two meetings ago, I think.
No, it was December the 2nd, wasn't it? Was one before that?
December 2nd, I can say that the one on December 2nd regarded an action. This is more of a referral to the actual budget process to go line by line entries and how we spend money accordingly.
But doesn't it make sense to have like a policy and a framework before we send something to budget?
Well, that's why I included 95 pages of supplemental information.
Well, I'm actually not quite following what the purpose of this is. Anyway, thanks.
Right, Councillor, we'll have you again for Councillor Ferguson.
Yeah, I think I've answered that.
Okay, so
and if I'm not actually asking for action. I mean, when we sit down, I think that most of us have the experience on council know that when we go over the budget, and I think the last time I looked at the budget, if I may be wrong, there was at least 100 or so pages of information with department by department, both capital and operational expenses line by line entry, and I think it's a long process we do, and we review roads, we review sewer projects, we review water projects, park and recreation, fire department. There's a number of things we do. This is no different than going over how we look at roads and how we address some of these things.
Okay, we have Councillor Woodward.
Yeah, no, I was just going to have a couple, but heaven forbid we ask council for action on the issue. I also didn't quite understand the motion that the arterial road network acquisition and funding. What does that mean? Maybe I could ask the mover arterial road network acquisition and funding be referred to the budget. What network acquisition and funding is the mover referring to?
That's why, if I may, through the chair, that's why I referenced things like Yorkson, Jericho, Central Gordon, and 208 Corval, the Greenway amenity, how indeed we put those particular amenities in place. Well, I also included the, and notwithstanding the Willoughby Arterial Road Completion Amenity Policy, which was a document produced by staff that I don't think we've reviewed it in detail, but I've included that as well. We've got a number of roads and other activities in which is certainly documented in those reports and that we need to go over and determine what indeed we can do and not do, and also what projects are in process for completion regarding those arterial roads.
Okay, I mean, I'm not going to press the issue. I still don't really know what arterial road network acquisition and funding means, separate from the policy that's been worked on by myself and council, amending it from time to time, and then the industry and public consultation that's gone on to develop that. I don't know what the Greenway amenity policies and the CAC policies have to do with a specific proposal that's been vetted and reviewed by staff and gone through that industry and public consultation, and is ready for some final changes before being voted up or down. You know, I don't actually want the current version of WARCAP forwarded to the budget process. That's the Willoughby Arterial Road Amenity Completion Policy. Completion amenity policy, I don't really want that current version, because that current version is a tax on development to give a small number of property owners a special deal, which is what the motion that I put forward on December 2nd was designed to address, which was voted down rather definitively. So I don't support this, not because I don't want to discuss it at the budget, because I don't want the current version of the WARCAP policy based upon industry and public input to also not just solve 208 Street, which is what those amendments were attempted to do. We went through a process to try to reduce the amenity charge per acre to a smaller amount, but still leave it as essentially a tax, and to give a small number of private property owners a special deal. The UDI and the industry concerns were to try to preserve existing economics, but also the larger issues when we solve that issue of making it essentially a latecomer structure that doesn't expire, we can add some additional roads back into that proposal, because it's not just 4 avenues on 208 Street, it's 202A and no sidewalks for kids, and the section of 80th Avenue between 202A and 204th, and the Willoughby connector issue, which still exists. This is not just 4 avenues on 208 Street, and those amendments that were voted down on December 2nd were attempting to address the very concerns that now all of a sudden a notice of motion appears to send that to the budget process. I don't really understand it. We can raise anything we want at the budget process. I don't think we need to send every policy that we found under the sun over to the budget process so there can be a notice of motion indicating concern for this issue when it was definitively voted down 2 meetings ago. Thanks.
Councillor Whitmarsh.
Yeah, I'm reading through just flipping through and sort of saw through the different references, and I'm not really exactly sure what the intention of the motion is. I see that, you know, it's wanting to address, and this is how I'm perceiving it, and maybe the mover can explain after I've expressed how I'm seeing it, but I'm seeing it that it's really looking at the current structure, the current policies we have in place for building of roads, and applying those somehow to Willoughby, Brookswood, and other areas, and bringing the current policies that we have to the budgeting process. But it also includes, as Councillor Woodward has mentioned, this WARCAP policy, which was not passed by Council, but it's included as one of the reference documents to send to the 2020 budget process. So I'm a bit confused by if this is to try and look at current strategies that we have in place and try and look at how we would complete these various arterial roads, with the addition of adding WARCAP as part of a policy to consider some other way, even though it wasn't passed at the time. And so maybe the mover could further explain a little bit what the intention is and how this would show up at the in the budgeting process, what we'd actually be discussing from a budget perspective at the budget process. How would we look at these references and use that in our budget discussions? Maybe the mover could help to enlighten a little bit.
I actually don't have any problem, number one, playing a role of the parliamentarian, and number two, playing a role of staff, so I can easily do that if I may. Number one, from a parliamentarian point of view, I'm not referencing any other report, any other motion. That's December 2nd or something motion that other members of council have mentioned. I am not referring to that. References are merely references. They're not part of the motion, nor have I included them part of the motion. They're just references. So for folks that want to read and analyze and discuss, I am not aware, and perhaps I can ask a question if I may, since I'm a member of council, not a member of staff. I can ask them, have we, this particular council, had any, have we approved the November 18th WARCAP motion, if I may, or WARCAP report?
Mr. Bakken?
To the question directly, I think it's just been received, and I think I can add a point of clarification. I think we dropped a word in the motion. I think it's that the arterial road network acquisition process and funding, and the word process is missing, be referred to the 2020 budget for discussion, including but not limited to, and it goes on from there. I think the intention, and the mover can correct us if we're wrong, that it was to actually look at the process, whatever that may be, and as I just heard, not situation specific to any previous motion or direction, and that we look at that in the context of other regulatory processes that we actually have. That may illuminate the issue a bit more. It's really the referral of the arterial road network acquisition process, and then of course the supporting policies be discussed in the context of the budget. I think that's what the general intent was. That
is correct. It should be process funding. And also, I just wanted to point out that I specifically went over a number of those particular reports for information purposes, as I do in other things. I also wanted to point out to this council, this is the second time we're looking at the budget, not the first time, the very second time we're looking at the budget. So we're relatively new into reviewing our budget and budget requirements. If council doesn't want to look at roads or look at how we fund roads or go through a process, that would be up to council. But I wanted to make sure that I put this front and center, because I believe that some of this process is important. And also we had a very important report on November 18th that we haven't really gone on. I believe we haven't gone on in detail. That's up to council to determine. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Richter. Oh, sorry. Okay. Is it on?
Still on. Press there. Now it's on. And now I'm really confused, because when we voted down the December 2nd WARCAP thing, didn't we, by voting it down, basically say we're going to continue on with road development the way we've always done it, which is as areas get developed, the roads get built? Am I mistaken in that?
Mr. Bakken?
Bakken?
I think the implications of that vote, so to revisit, we had a receipt motion in terms of the concept, then it went to something specific, and that specific was defeated. What was left then on the table was that we proceed with the current process, and I believe the intention with this motion, and I could be wrong, is to augment it by actually having a further discussion on the process, meaning that while it could be left to the existing process, new ideas could be fostered.
So basically, we're just referring to the budget process, the process we already use.
Difficult ground speaking for the mover, but I think what it was intended to do was to refer the process with a view to improving it, enhancing it going forward, given the history that council has undertaken with some of the motions that were in place, but with a view to still trying to, I guess, advance some of the road improvements that are deemed to be required.
But our policy says that we don't build roads now unless the properties being developed by a developer. I'm sorry, this is just very, very confusing now. I don't actually understand why this motion's even in front of council. Thank you.
Councillor Arneson.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Through you then to Mr. Backen, I have a question regarding the prior WRCAP notices or motions and how they were received by council. So if you could just clarify that by receiving them but not enacting them in any way means, but they're not extinguished, they still exist as something that could be operationalized in the future. So, for example, one could take the WRCAP as was presented and use that in the budget as a discussion point, and council could then consider whether or not, within the context of the 2020 budget, they wish to initiate any or all of WRCAP. Is that correct?
Correct as to substance and process, it might be a bit trickier. And what I mean by that is when we have a motion that's been received, in and of itself doesn't mean that any action will be taken. It forms part of the, I guess, legislative history and would be information or facts that could be drawn upon to advance certain discussions. I think the complicating factor here is the perception that there was a subsequent motion that attempted to operationalize WRCAP in some way, and that was defeated. And I think that's part of the challenge in terms of, well, at what point then do we have a motion that is a new motion versus simply a motion being brought back for reconsideration? When we look at that history in the context of the motion before you, I think it's to refer the road improvement network process as it is, but also how it could be enhanced going forward with a view to trying to deal with the issues that are perceived to be existing in Willoughby. So in that regard, where I think the intent was to actually advance it for further discussion, but and I think you're correct that some of the factual documents that exist could be part of that, but it also, I guess, must respect the previous direction of council, which at this point was that the model as was suggested to be operationalized was not successful. Therefore, it must be some other model unless that motion is reconsidered.
Okay, but just to once again clarify, it could be reconsidered at this point.
It could be
or any point.
There is some language in the procedural bylaw that suggests it could be reconsidered, or if it hasn't been acted upon, it can be brought forth in a very similar form. Ms. Bauer can illuminate on that, but there's some special language for situations where a motion has not been acted upon, and of course, if it was defeated, it hasn't been acted upon.
Thank you.
Councillor Woodward.
Yeah, no, my confusion level is somewhat increasing as well. You know, the process that council's very aware of that I embarked upon was a lengthy and patient one. As I tried to design it to be as helpful and have the consultation with staff and other members of council over a long period of time in regards to putting together a relatively specific structure and proposal, working it through the staff, multiple notices of motion, public consultation with the industry, and then having it come back to council for some final refinements. And if council votes it down, council votes it down. And if we discover that 4 lanes now doesn't really mean 4 lanes now, it means 4 lanes sometime in the future, or we want to bring it back perhaps just before an election, you know, for me, that's not the process that I wanted to do. I wanted to sincerely solve this problem. And I view this motion as, you know, political meaninglessness, really. Just to have something, to go to the budget to discuss something, who knows what for sure, to maybe look at some future policies for consideration with no specificity on what they are or how we're going to look at them, versus the process that I did, which was a detailed policy proposal for council's consideration and refinement and adoption or rejection. And I brought forward a notice of motion for the evening meeting to try to bring some finality to the issue and not preserve this notion that it's somehow going to...
Can I just do a point of order?
Sure.
We're just getting off the motion.
No, we're not.
Well, I'd just like to talk to the acting mayor.
Mr. Backen.
Point of order. Okay.
Well, all of a sudden we're talking about you. We should be talking about Steve's motion.
I'm just explaining why I'm going to not support this based upon my own actions, Councillor Davis. But yeah, it's a point of order. It's fine. Clarify the point of order.
as I interpreted, the point of order was really a topic of discussion. What I heard Councillor Woodward referring to was that there is another motion that he believes will supersede this. Therefore, as a brief explanation as to why he's not supporting the motion, it would be appropriate to touch upon it to explain why he doesn't support this motion, if I interpret the comments correctly.
Very much.
That was very specific. He started his conversation with he's getting more and more confused. So anyhow, okay, you know what? It's okay. Let's carry on. But I think we're getting away, at least in my opinion, we're getting away from the motion.
All right, we have...
May I continue, Madam Chair?
Sure.
Thank you. So in light of that, it's obviously a very touchy subject when people say one thing during a campaign and say another at the council table a year later. Obviously, that's a touchy subject. For me, I spent a lot of time working on this particular...
Sure.
We're talking about a last election. Are we not supposed to be talking about this motion? About putting it to staff? We're going to have our chance to talk about your motion tonight. But today, can we not give Councillor Ferguson his due because he put this through?
I'm not hearing the point of order.
Sorry, I'm new at this.
I'm not hearing the point of order.
No, I think the further point of order is that the subject matter is it veering far afield. The chair has to determine if it's veering too far afield from the intent of the motion or the discussion. As to the rationale as to why the motion wouldn't be supported given a subsequent motion, that's certainly valid. As to the historical election processes, I think Councillor Davis's point is that relevant to the motion, and that's something the chair could provide some guidance on to the member of council.
Okay, so where are we at?
Councillor Woodward will carry on, but probably try to focus his comments.
Okay.
No, I'll start scrutinizing all of Councillor Davis's comments now to make sure they're
Okay,
specific
so maybe
to every
that's...
If they're
single
on
motion.
topic, go right ahead.
And I'll interrupt you on the next time you speak to this issue. So I think for me, I'll just wrap it up then. I think I've made my point that it's just a tad frustrating to work through the process with staff for almost up to a year to see this motion at the table as a result. Thank you.
All right, we have Councillor Richter.
Really? I thought I'd spoken.
Okay, so I have you, and then I have Councillor Whitmarsh, so maybe my speaker list is...
Okay, thank you. I think if the motion is to bring forward a discussion of the current policies that we have for the acquisition process and funding process for our tier roads, bring the current process into the 2020 budget, then that makes sense to me. I'm not sure if the budget process is the best place for us to then start devising and creating a new policy as we go forward. And I do think that what the current process that we have needs tweaking, needs adjusting. There's things that we could do to improve it. There's lots of things in WARCAP that people supported. I think there's lots of things that they didn't support. So it's not that all of WARCAP was terrible. There's lots of good things in WARCAP. It was for me personally a budget challenge and the issue of borrowing more money. So to me, this motion is a bit confusing, but I think we do need, and it would be helpful to understand exactly what is the process for getting roads done right now, how are we doing it, and how could we move forward to get some things completed and done. But the motion, when it starts to include some references to some policies that weren't actually passed by this council, that's to me where it starts to get really confusing. I'd rather us refer to those things that are part of our policy as opposed to things that we've discussed and were defeated.
All right, seeing no further questions from anyone, I'm going to call the vote. Oh, sorry. Right. And that is... I have to label it. 1 second. Okay, so it's... All right, and it's defeated with all of us defeating it except for Councillor Ferguson. All right. Other business. All right, here we go. Councillor Richter. Oh.
Yes, through you to staff. We received an email yesterday, all of council, from a Ms. Renshaw with regards to the size of secondary suites being limited to 90 meters square. I see in our on-table stuff today that we got, and the items distributed, there's even more emails about that. So I was just wondering if I could ask staff, what is the reason for limiting the size of secondary suites to 90 meters? Or alternatively, is there a reason why we couldn't go to larger suites?
Madam Chair, Mr. Seffi can help, but as I understand it, what we're in is a bit of an interim situation. We had a BC building code that had a limitation. The legislation has changed to remove the limitation as to size. So as a consequence, during the intervening period, larger suites, I suppose, could be entertained. The purpose behind the bylaw process is to give us a legislative framework to analyze it, given the fact that we have a housing study that I think is underway, and to that point to make, I guess, further decisions. This is a bit of an in-between measure that will be revisited, I think, upon the determination of the housing study, and in that way it gives us some flexibility. In answer to the question directly, though, through the comments here today or through a subsequent process, Council certainly has a jurisdiction to set a higher limitation or no limitation. I think the lack of a limitation would be a bit concerning, but could set a higher threshold if they so chose. Mr. Seffi?
Madam Chair, I don't know what else I could add other than, I guess, the housing needs assessment, which is currently in process and progress, is expected to be delivered to Council sometime this year. I'm anticipating maybe the third quarter of this year. That will help Council determine what an appropriate cap might be, as Mr. Backen referenced. In the absence of anything in the zoning bylaw, that would mean that there is an unlimited, I guess, amount of floor space that could be dedicated to a secondary suite, which, in I guess, staff's opinion at this stage anyway, is not workable, and it's not necessarily in the best interest of the municipality with respect to assessment of impact and with respect to management of the implications in terms of the impact on services. So this is an interim measure. It is replacing the existing or the previous provisions, the cap that was in the BC Building Code, with the province removing that 90 square meters from the BC Building Code. Most municipalities in the Lower Mainland, with the exception of 2, we have done an informal survey of all the municipalities. There are only 2 who are going with no provisions in their zoning bylaw. Everybody else is essentially following the previous regime in terms of a cap until such time as another threshold might be deemed to be more appropriate for the municipalities by their respective councils.
Okay, so if we're getting a housing needs assessment in the fall of this year, doesn't it make more sense to hold off on changing the bylaw until we get that housing needs assessment? Because these emails have been raising some very good points about, single parents with 2 or 3 children.
Subject of tonight's public hearing, and that's not where
Mr. Backen?
So, Madam Chair, as to the point of order, it is correct that it is subject to the public hearing this evening, but in these situations under other business, it's usually permissible to clarify some of the regulatory framework around the public hearing itself or the issues before it. And Councillor Richter's point directly in terms of what would happen if there was simply no bylaw. The challenge is that the provincial government has removed the threshold of the 50 meters or 1,000 square feet. So in the interval then between, say, today and the fall, when the study is done, there would in theory be no limitation to suite size. There is no bylaw in place. It's the BC Building Code that's had that provision removed. The result would therefore be if someone wanted to have a secondary suite of significant proportions, 2, 3, 4,000 square feet, they could do so. And then when the housing needs assessment came back, it may suggest that there would be a different size that's appropriate. As a consequence, we would have in stream a number of these that would perhaps not be consistent with that housing needs assessment. I think the theory is to stick with the current number as just a good interim measure, because we may go up from there. Certainly wouldn't go down from there, may go up from there, but at least we wouldn't have this this gap in the regulatory structure. Mr.
Okay,
Sethi,
so just to clarify, we're not debating it. I'm asking questions.
All right.
Just to clarify then, the housing needs assessment that we will be getting this fall will indeed address the minimum or the maximum size of secondary suites?
Yeah, that's correct. The assessment will actually deal with the parameters in terms of what the needs are, and that by implication will deal with the size. Mr. Sethi, can you provide any further comments as to the specificity with which the study will analyze the size?
Yes, it will not, unless I guess we direct the process to do otherwise. It is not anticipated to directly respond to the question of the specific size, but it will make reference to, in general terms, the impact that an amendment would have in terms of meeting the housing needs and whether in fact it's an appropriate size or not that's currently or previously was in the provincial code.
Okay, so let me just make sure I understand this. So unless there's direction from council to address the size of secondary suites, it's not going to be addressed in this housing needs assessment?
Madam Chair, the housing needs assessment will inform council, will provide information for council to determine what an appropriate size might be. It will not in itself provide a cap or a recommendation.
But we could, I could, for example, put a notice of motion on asking that be taken into consideration as part of the study, right?
That's correct. I think what Mr. Sethi is alluding to is the study may suggest that there is a definite need for 2, 3, or 4 bedroom suites. That will affect the size. Council will then determine what the appropriate size is, or Council could direct that there be a specific reference to what the optimal size is given the needs assessment that exists.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. The second item that I wanted to raise, Madam Chair, is with regards to another email we received from a resident, Mr. Belensky, and we got that email this afternoon at 2 p.m. With regards to cannabis lights and generator noise and emissions. Now, I was just wondering if staff could clarify for us. We are participating in a farm practices review board session around the cannabis industry. Are these topics going to be addressed as part of that farm practices review?
That's correct. The farm practices industry review would be dealing with such things as what's considered normal farm practice for the growing of this crop. It's a new crop to most agricultural settings, so as a consequence there are such concerns as lighting, noise, emissions. They have to be addressed in terms of what would be considered normal farm practice. The case going before FIRB, of which we're an intervener, will help illuminate that and perhaps provide some guidance for the industry in British Columbia.
Okay, so if I forward this email that I received, and I think all of council received it as well too, could staff please respond to Mr. Belensky and say that this will be addressed as part of the farm practices?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
All right, next speaker, Councillor Long.
Well, thank you. I have just a few items in the 3 minutes we got left in today's distribution. One was from Wind and Tide. It's number 1 in today's distribution list, and it complains about lack of lighting in the parking lot, very close to in the Willoughby area. We call that, what do we call that area? I can never remember that. But anyway, you know where it is, by the Matheson House. So I think staff should, boost up the lighting considerably if that's an issue, if things are happening untoward in the dark. Second one would be the farmers market. It's been highly publicized, and we have a letter. So maybe council should be applying and suggesting that we might have a location somewhere close by that might make it more successful. And the third is quite an important one. Well, they're all important. This one talks about this insurance, and I'm so confused. I don't know about council, but it said in the report, item 10, item 14, that the rating from the township is 1 to 5, for example, and 1 being the highest. So that means 5 should be good and 7 even better. But So I'm not sure if this is backwards or what, one being the highest risk or the highest non-risk. And I don't understand why Aldergrove would be 5. I don't know if that's good or bad, but I mean, we have a fire department right down the street. So I don't really think we can do it in the 30 seconds, but it is confusing to me. So maybe we can have a suggestion, Madam Chair. How do we?
Mr. Vacan.
Today's distribution list, the chiefs provided a memo. We should perhaps start with that and then determine if there's further information needed.
That is the memo that's got me confused, but I'll look at it some more, but maybe we can talk about it another time. Thank you very much.
With the chief, yeah.
Okay, so Councillor Ferguson?
Yeah, I will also continue. I had the same item, number 14, January 13th, regarding insurance, but since part 1 has been answered by Councillor Long, my question has come to my attention, and perhaps staff might be able to help me. I see insurance for strata and condominiums and perhaps townhouses as being a challenge for 2020 issue. I was just wondering if you were hearing that as well. I'm hearing that buildings, I'm not sure, throughout the region have not even been insured because they can't afford the insurance, or there's a new insurance challenges out there. And I was just wondering if staff is aware of this new 2020 issue.
We're aware of the growing issue in the context of the affordability of insurance is becoming a challenge. Insurance is available, but it doesn't mean it's affordable. And the industry is suggesting that it's a result of actually increased costs and increased risk. The cost to reconstruct a damaged structure is going up significantly, and the risk that they assert is increasing because of the nature of the uses that are there. Some of that we can understand, some we cannot understand, and that's I think where the chief's wrestling with it, and we can have him try to clarify his memo with you directly.
And I think my supplemental to that would be as well, I see the chief here as well, is that I'm not sure if it's something in Langley yet, but throughout the region, I hear there's whole buildings, apartment buildings in some areas that have no fire insurance whatsoever for the entire building because they can't qualify or something like that for an actual insurance policy. And I'm not sure if you're aware of that, but I'm hearing that. I have to do more research on it, obviously, but I see it as a 2020 issue.
It's not likely that they don't qualify. I mean, unless there's some major structural defects with the building, it's likely an affordability issue. There's all sorts of insurance products available, including high risk. It's going to be the cost of it that's associated with it. And I think it's fair to say that the insurance industry has classified strata dwellings as being of a higher risk than we're traditionally used to.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. I'm going to, I need a motion to terminate.
Termination.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Long. All in favor? All right. And we will reconvene at 7 o'clock.